So, a man who probably amongst us needs no introduction at all, it's Mr. Tony Benn.
Well, I think we've had very good speeches tonight, and I don't know how I'm going to add to them, except to say that what all of them have been saying is that by coming to the meeting tonight, you've joined a very powerful national movement. And that national movement involves everybody's interests. And whether women or gay or lesbian or something, it doesn't matter. We're all part of the human community, and we ought to live in a society that treats people well. Now, the funny thing is, tonight reminds me of a meeting I've never ever forgotten that occurred 68 years ago. I was 17 years old. I was on my way to South Africa to learn to fly to be an RAF pilot. And during the war, everybody talked all the time, what are we going to do after the war? Because the war was awful, and we've got, what are we going to do afterwards? And so we decided to have a meeting on war aims, and I was sent off to see the colonel in charge of troops, who was a colonel. I was an aircraftman second class, which is the lowest rank you could be in the Air Force, and I saluted and said, can we have a meeting on war aims? And he said, no politics, is there, Mr. So I said, oh, no, no, and of course we had the most wonderful political meeting. But what I remember was one lad who spoke, I wish I knew his name, and he said in the 1930s we had mass unemployment. He said we don't have unemployment in wartime. If you have full employment killing Germans, why can't you have full employment building houses, building hospitals, building schools, recruiting nurses, recruiting teachers, training? Why not? And what he was saying was very simple. He said we have to use the same application to meet the needs of peace that you use to meet the needs of war. He said, for example, have you ever heard of an air marshal who said, I can't bomb Berlin this month because I've exceeded my budget? Good point, you just did it because you had to do it. And that was the basis on which we built the welfare state. And this is what they are now trying to reverse. It's a comprehensive attempt to reverse the gains that were made in the post-war years. And how did we make them? We made them by popular campaigns and by the development of democracy. Because people didn't always realize this. Democracy is a very, very revolutionary idea. If you can't afford something, but you vote for a candidate who says he'll provide it, like the health service, then you are transferring power from the marketplace to the polling station, where you have equal vote even though you haven't got the money. And of course in the old days, if you had money, you went and got medical care, you went to education you wanted, you got the house you wanted, but there were a lot of people who didn't get it. And what education and the democracy meant was that you were able to build up the things that are now being attacked. And it is an extraordinary story what they're doing from the Educational Maintenance Alliance, which keeps youngsters at school right through to care of elderly people, is being completely dismantled. They're sacking people from local government, they're laying off, well, policemen. They wanted to cut the police, and then they realised it wasn't very popular, so they've asked the police to take a pay cut in order to retain their jobs. And that won't be very popular with the police either. Then their debt, you know, you'll find that your pension will be limited, so you can't gain everything that you've earned. And wherever you look, they're cutting it back. And of course, the main thing to remember is that this is based on a fraudulent argument. I mean, if you really believe that Britain's in an economic problem because there are too many libraries are kept open, because too many older people are being looked after, it's a complete nonsense. The reason we're in an economic difficulty, it's perfectly straightforward. 2 years ago, the banks were in danger of going bankrupt, and Gordon Brown, as a shrewd man, said if you let the banks go bankrupt, everyone with money will find it unable to get it out of the bank. So he bought up the banks, in effect. And now we're being asked to pay in order to have helped the banks. And that is the problem. We are being asked to pay for a crisis in capitalism for which we are not responsible. And now, of course, the bankers have got the money. What are they doing? Allocating themselves huge bonuses. I read the other day the president of Barclays, I think, has been allocated a £6 million bonus. Well, 6 million quid would go a long way to do things that we need to see done. And so, really, we have a very, very powerful argument. We're being taken back to market forces. The gap between rich and poor is going to widen. The services we need are going to be denied, and also it is a denial of solidarity. Because what we're really about in this campaign is the older people helping the students helping the people who are ill, men helping women, women helping men. And solidarity is a very interesting idea because it means you look beyond your own immediate interest and see how problems can be resolved. I remember during the miners' strike, I was the MP for a mining constituency in Chesterfield, and we had a group of American miners came over to support the British miners. And one of them made a speech about solidarity, which I've never forgotten. He said, in my mining village, there was a disused mine shaft, and a little boy fell down it. And so all the men of the village got round, and we found a rope, and we dropped it, but it was too short. And then we found a longer rope and dropped it, it was still too short. Then we found an even longer rope and dropped it, and out of the bottom of the pit came the little boy's voice, and what he said was, tie your ropes together. And that is what solidarity is about. If the old support the young and the men support the women and so on, then we have a movement which is really, really capable of changing things. And if you look back, I know the press always say, oh, it's hopeless, you'll never win, you're way out, and so on, it's a utopian idea. But if you look back on our history, all the great gains that have ever been made have been made by people just like ourselves who decided to campaign for what they wanted until they got it. I'll give you a few examples. It was illegal to be a member of a trade union. And down in Dorset, down in Tolpuddle, the local agricultural workers formed a union, took an oath. That was illegal, and they were sentenced to imprisonment in Australia. And there was such an outcry at this that they changed the law, and now trade unions are recognised. Or a couple of hundred years ago, of all the voters in Britain, only 2% of the men had the vote. 98% of the men didn't have the vote, the women didn't have the vote. And that campaign by the Chartists did get the vote for working class men. And then the suffragettes came along. And to begin with, suffragettes were ignored, then they were described as mad, then they were described as dangerous, they were locked up, forcibly fed, and there was such an outcry that women got the vote. And that is how we make progress. Don't make any mistake about it. Cynicism and skepticism and pessimism are the greatest enemies of any movement. When people say, you can't do it, it won't work, don't try, you'll just go out on a limb. And it's when people don't accept that change comes about. So that's why March the 26th is a very important event. Whether it will be on the scale of the Stop the War March in March 2003, I don't know. There are a couple of million people out there, but it'll be a big march. And I tell you, the person who will be watching it more carefully than anyone else, and that is the Prime Minister and the government, because they know that you cannot carry through policy against the overwhelming majority of public opinion. So we are part of a movement that if we do what there's so many precedents for being done in the past, if we stick together, if we campaign together, if we know what it's about, if we know the argument, we cannot be defeated. And it's in that spirit that I'm grateful to you for asking me to come, because I go around, as Claire does, all over the place doing meetings just like this. And I've never known a period in my life when so many people were so angry at what is happening, and they're looking for us to do something. And March the 26th and what follows from that is our opportunity to contribute, not just to win the case, but to raise the hopes of those who otherwise nothing can be done. So good luck, and thank you very much for asking me.